Australia is closed for business, open for plunder. Fight back. And seize this moment to end war. Coming up on this week's Citizens Report. Welcome to the Citizens Report for the 7th of August 2025. I'm Elisa Barwick. Joining me today is Citizens Party researcher Richard Bardon. Welcome, Richard.
Thanks, Elisa.
And on today's show, we are going to give you another example of how the crisis we have in banking in this country is causing our productive centres to shut down, and how we have to change that, and we have a compelling impetus to do it now. And then we're going to discuss the overwhelming message that, for one thing, came out of Sydney in this past week to end war and is echoing around the world. So stay tuned for that, with some important potentials coming forward. Now, to help us get the message out, please hit the like button, make a comment below. Of course, if you haven't subscribed already, please do so, and you'll be kept posted of any new info coming out, any new shows. And please, if you can, donate to the cause. There's a link below. Today's show is a bit of a show and tell, really. So we're going to be sharing with you some of what we've been up to over the past week, and it does involve a lot of getting around, and a lot of expense comes with that always. And also, don't forget, please, there's a link below, please join as a member of the Citizens Party to help us build the on-the-ground logistics that we need in this coming period to develop the policy and implement the policy inside of and outside of elections all the time. So that's the kind of support we need to keep doing what we do and to produce our the background material that goes into this show. Okay, so without further ado, our first topic: Australia is closed for business, open for plunder. Fight back. So, look, there's a lot of other elements, but one thing in particular that is leading to this situation is the banking model that we have pursued in recent decades since the advance of neoliberalism. Of course, it wasn't always that way. Australia had an incredible bank called the Commonwealth Bank of Australia before it was privatised, which funded the development of this country. That was the purpose, and is the purpose, of banking, which has gone by the wayside. And the fact that we collapsed and destroyed that banking framework has led to crisis on numerous fronts, all of which has led to the breakdown of the real economy. So you've got a desert of bank access, a desert of cash access. You've got things that affect people every day, businesses and citizens, like the blowout in surcharges with the shift to digital banking. You've also got things like scams, which we'll talk about some of those during the first topic. You've got the shutdown of local business, of small businesses, where there's no small banks that are familiar with people in local areas, that are willing to create the funding for people in local areas, for entrepreneurs to start up businesses, to crank up the local economies in the regions.
Well, we should say there are a great many small banks, but just local customer-owned banks in individual towns. But a lot of those are too small and have capital requirements imposed on them by the regulators that the big banks could live up to, but don't. These guys can't afford to do what they otherwise could do if they had the backup of the kind of public bank like the old Commonwealth that we're talking about to be able to backstop their loans, as the old Commonwealth did in both wars and the various economic ructions of the 70s and so on. So, because and as I said, these banks should be doing a roaring trade. These whole towns should be going ahead in leaps and bounds. All the potential is there, but it's being choked off by these corporate banks that don't care about anything. They don't care about the country, the people, the economy, nothing. All they care about is their profits, their bonuses, and then they bail out and leave someone else, ultimately the government and the taxpayers, holding the bag. and the government doesn't do anything because they've all got cushy jobs, it would seem, lined up
Yeah.
in these same banks when people get sick of them and give them the boot.
Yeah.
So,
And you know, even the small community banks, like we've seen with the case of Bendigo Bank, which was put forward as a model to create community banks where the locals invest and so forth, and that was subject to review in the last several years. And of course now, as we've said on recent shows, Bendigo Bank is closing 10 branches and 28 agencies, and it seems to be there's a process in the background where some of these community banks, which are certainly still profitable and can still operate quite well, seem to be being forced in some way to shutter, to close down. So we want to talk about that a little more in this show. But firstly, in terms of Australia, as I said, closing for business, I mean, we're putting signs up all across country, towns, regions, you know, we're closed for business. The only business, so-called business, that Australia appears to be doing is in regions where it could not possibly be conceived of as being good business sense, like things like AUKUS and so forth, which is why, as we said in the title, we're open for plunder. We're setting up these kinds of arrangements which no business person would ever do in a million years, like the AUKUS deal that you and Robbie talked about on last week's show, where, you know, you feel as an outsider looking at this, you feel like writing to the ACCC to say, or to the Ombudsman to say, hang on, this deal makes no business sense whatsoever. Yeah. And there's a whole host of things.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I mean, and that if this was a business contract, the ACCC and the courts would strike it down, because it just wouldn't be legal to write. So you'd be saving someone from their own negligence to their own interest. Like there's at least that much protection built into corporate law, where if somebody hands a sucker a completely ridiculous, onerous, one-sided contract, like where we're supposed to cough up nearly $400 billion for submarines that we'll probably never get and aren't guaranteed to get, and we won't get the money back if they don't turn up. Imagine, as a Greens senator said a couple of years ago, David Shoebridge, imagine buying a car on those terms.
Yeah, no, I mean, it gives car salesmen a good name, really. I mean, if you were going to buy a car in 10 years at a certain price, but yet if it was never delivered, you'd have no comeback.
Yeah, imagine paying 4 times the unit price for a car that isn't going to be built for 10 years, and then they decide that actually it'd be better for us to keep this and drive it around ourselves, so you get nothing and you don't get your money. That's what this is.
We might give you a lift now and again.
Yeah. Well, we'll put our car in your garage and charge you for the privilege, and we'll operate it to, you know, we'll hire it out to Uber or whatever. You'll get nothing to that.
And meanwhile, you're funding our entire car manufacturing plant overseas.
If you want to think these submarines in those terms, this is what this government has agreed to. And it just wouldn't fly in the business world, as you say. It just wouldn't.
No. So we want to hone in now on the closure, the shutting of local towns and whole regions of the country, actually, by again looking, as we have the last couple of weeks, at the west coast of Tasmania and Queenstown as an example of, you know, where you have, it's like shutting off the blood supply when you think about no banks on the entire west coast of Tasmania. If you want to support the productive parts of this country that are actually generating the real wealth, as opposed to just, you know, the service sectors and so forth in the cities, you know, that's what you do. You shut off the blood to those areas. So Queenstown on the west coast of Tasmania, as people would know, are losing their last bank, which is the Bendigo Bank, and people will have to drive 2.5 hours along what can often be icy, or at the very least, you know, windy and quite dangerous at times, mountain highways, roads, to get to the nearest bank in Burnie. So watch this video, because what we're going to do now is give you a bit of a sense of events that occurred in Queenstown this week, because the local council got engaged with us and in the process of saving their bank, called a town meeting. But Robert Barwick travelled down there. He flew into Hobart and drove with a good Australian Citizen Party supporter and Senate candidate Ray Williams to the historic town of Queenstown, where the Commonwealth Bank had its origins with their Member of Parliament in the early 1900s when we first
in the first federal
federated,
parliament, King O'Malley,
who designed the Commonwealth Bank and first purveyed its potential from the balconies of the local pubs there, which there were dozens at the time. So what we're going to see first, we're going to watch this video, very quick clip of Robbie being driven by Ray into Queenstown, and you can check out the road. This is the same road that people will have to travel to get to the closest bank, and you can. This is in decent weather, but of course at times
it ices over in winter. It fogs up. The clouds come in at the drop of a hat any time. It's like if you live in Victoria, imagine driving from, Healesville over the range to, basically anywhere. Or from Alexandra, where they just lost their last bank, where they're losing their last bank, over the range to the next bank. Same sort of situation.
Yeah. So have a look at this.
So we're just coming into Queenstown. I wanted to show you the road that the folk of Queenstown will have to drive on if they needed to go to another bank. We're coming from the south.
In the south,
Yeah, we're coming from the south, so there's another road going north, of course, but there you go. There's beautiful Queenstown down there. I'll use this footage on the Citizens Report just to illustrate it for people. So yeah, I'll just duck up to the bank.
Yeah.
Sure.
It only take me 4 hours.
Sure.
Oh, yeah, 4 hours.
I'm glad I drove this and had an actual reminding myself what this experience is like.
Okay, now it just so happens that our Senate candidate for Tasmania, Ray Williams, is with us here today because he happens to be in Melbourne. This wasn't even planned, but it comes as a welcome gift because Ray happened to be at the meeting that I just mentioned in Queenstown with Robert Barwick, and you picked him up from the airport and took him how many hours? 3 hours or something?
Oh, near enough to 4 from
4
home.
hours. Okay,
Out
up to
Queenstown.
Queenstown. So we're dedicated people. And you were at that meeting, and the Queenstown Council and local activists convened this public meeting on a Sunday afternoon after the council had passed a resolution, not only calling for the bank to remain open, and of course they've put that to the local Bendigo Bank, but they have also in their motion demanded that the federal government respond to the recommendations of the Senate inquiry that was held into bank branch closures, which they have waited over a year. They're supposed to respond within 90 days and they have not yet done so. And of course the recommendations encompass the solutions, including the potential for public banking to take place through the post offices that could, solve these problems of towns dying because the last bank branch closes its doors. So, Ray, I wanted for you to give our viewers a little bit of an insight into what took place at this meeting on Sunday afternoon in Queenstown. So
Right.
you did speak at the meeting, but who else was at the meeting?
Oh, well, there were several other politicians, but we bookended the meeting. Robbie spoke first, as I suppose you'd say the lead speaker.
Ahead of the other,
yeah.
I believe, 1 federal and 2 state politicians.
Yep,
Okay.
yep. And they didn't promise too much, but Robbie, in his usual very constructive way, came across very well and was well applauded. And then at the end of the session, they let me have a few words to say, as I've been an ex-branch manager of a bank years ago, and I implored the people to go away from this meeting and get in touch with their MPs even go to the extent of writing a letter or an email, not just going to a meeting and saying, oh yeah, this is wonderful, and doing nothing. I really wanted them to action it further. And, I'm so impressed with the Citizens Party, and I told the people this, they're the only party that's doing the constructive stuff to try and change this horrible financial situation that we are in Australia. It is pathetic. When I was in a bank years and years ago, the private banks, there were the big three in those days, all made profits in thousands of country towns, etc. And the Commonwealth Bank ran along as well. And, everyone was served well, particularly in country towns. And what grates on me is to see the withdrawal of all these branches, particularly in country towns, and it just stifles the economy. My wife and I actually had to borrow money 10 years ago to build a Mitre 10 store, which ultimately we did, but it was like crawling over broken glass to get the money.
Yeah.
Ultimately we did, and it created 35 extra jobs in a regionally job-depressed area. And this is exactly why we need more competition and branches opened up in these country towns, so that emerging businesses like ours was at the time can create more employment. I just cannot understand why the Labor Party don't get behind this.
Yes.
Because it creates jobs. Liberals not so, because they're welded onto the liberal sort of philosophies. And another thing that concerns me greatly, in Queenstown and other places, if the post offices do not become more economical viable, guess what? They'll probably close the Queenstown Post Office next.
That's right.
Then you're cutting the heart out of that CBD.
Yes.
And Mr. Graham, the CEO of Australia Post, has got earmarked, I believe, 400 post offices to close because they're economically not viable. But if they could add banking to their portfolio, it becomes more viable and looks after the cash distribution around Australia, creates more employment, creates more job opportunities. It's such a win-win. And the Citizens Party have many, many major important agendas, but the one that drives me mainly is the banking, because it's the essence and the hub of how we can recover as a country. We've got a guy down in Hobart, Bob Clifford, who does the INCATs, the catamarans. Now he wants to do a new development out New Norfolk Way along the Derwent River. He might want $1 billion to do it. Well, you was never going to get that sort of money from a Bendigo bank anyway.
No.
And the big four would rather lend money to the wealthy people to have big housing mortgages in Melbourne and Sydney. But a new Commonwealth Bank would be the financial vehicle, I think, to fund massive infrastructure projects like Bob Clifford's.
Sure.
And how about high-speed rail along the east coast of Australia, or the iron boomerang up north, or the Bradford water scheme up out of Queensland, right down through the through the water systems into the Murray-Darling to create more agricultural employment and food for our growing population. So I'm sorry I've wandered off a bit
No,
here,
that's excellent. And I was just going to mention, because reading Hansard from the early 1900s recently, as you do, I came across these questions about the fact that post offices were closing at that time because they weren't considered economical. And someone put forward, oh, well, what if we use them for banking as well? And eventually that is what resulted when the Commonwealth Bank started. They had ready-made branches ready to go in all the post offices. So what we're proposing, it's been done before. It's not rocket science.
No.
But I believe there was more than, say, 50 odd people at this meeting, and they passed a resolution, and we'll put the photo up because they all put their hands up to indicate unanimous support for Bendigo Bank to keep the branch open and also as the council had previously done, calling on the Albanese government to respond to the report of the Senate inquiry. So we found, you know, enormous and deep support for that in the town.
Yes, that's true. And look, I would have liked to have seen even more people there. But it was well attended, which was good, because when it first started, we did not think there were going to be many there, but it turned out to be well attended, which was very encouraging and heartening, considering the effort that the organisers had gone to, and Robbie, who was so busy and up in Sydney the day before, and he come down, the least I could do was to help that man. You know,
Well, speaking of which, I want to show 2 more videos, and I thank you very much for your input. We'll come back to Richard in a moment, but we'll show these 2 videos first, which Robbie, when you took him down the main street and he realised that there was this grand, magnificent post office, building, half of, maybe more than half of which is not being used.
Football kick away.
Okay, right. Okay, so you've got this little, you'll see it in the video, this little tiny Bendigo Bank branch, and then across the road, the post office. So these 2 videos that I'll show back to back here just focus on how rapidly we could implement the solution with postal banking. Thanks, Ray.
Hi everybody, I'm in Queenstown. This is the Bendigo Bank branch that is going to be closed in September, which is the last bank on the entire west coast of Tasmania. But hey, there's a solution, and it's really, really close, because look at this. This is the wonderful Queenstown Post Office. That's Citizens Party supporter Ray Williams right there, who's driven me all the way out here. Here's this big, beautiful post office, much bigger than this piddling little Bendigo Bank branch. This could be the bank for the entire west coast of Tasmania. And the guy who deserves credit for this, this is the irony of ironies, is King O'Malley, who started the Commonwealth Bank 100 years ago. He represented this area in the federal parliament, and that's the Hunters Hotel that he used to stand on that balcony and speak to the people in the street below on why Australia needed a public bank. And it all comes home here in Queenstown, this fight for a public bank. There's the post office, there's the Bendigo Bank. Post office, Bendigo Bank. This could be the bank for the entire west coast of Tasmania, thanks to King O'Malley, what he used to do 100 years ago at the Hunters Hotel there, and of course the Citizens Party, which have been relentlessly fighting for this policy for its whole existence, and for a postal bank for the last 5 years. Just got back to Hobart Airport from Queenstown, drove back this morning. Went up to Queenstown yesterday to fight the good fight to save the Queenstown Bendigo Bank branch from Bendigo Bank CEO Richard Fennell shutting it down and taking away the last banking service on the entire west coast of Tasmania so he can make a bigger profit and a bigger bonus for himself. Stuff the people of Tasmania who will no longer have a bank in the whole west coast. As I said in the other video, across the street from the Bendigo Bank branch is a big, beautiful post office though. And that is the solution. There's going to be 20 towns that are reliant on the Bendigo Bank branch in Queenstown on the west coast of Tasmania that are no longer going to have a bank. But they all have a post office. They all have a post office. Mr. Albanese, are you going to let Bendigo Bank close, the last bank on the entire west coast of Tasmania? Or are you going to actually do what the Senate inquiry into bank branch closures asked you to do and actually address this issue and stop banks doing it? Or alternatively, are you going to do what you actually have said yourself you know is the right thing to do? Have a public bank to force the private banks to compete and start a post office bank and save all these towns? The solution is in your hands, Mr. Albanese, Mr. Chalmers. People of Australia should demand it.
All right. Richard's back, and I just want to also mention that we did get some good media coverage in the local papers, the Tasmania Times, which we'll put up on the screen, which ran our media release ahead of the media release from the local MP, so that was good too. Top billing in both cases at the meeting and the coverage. And also I wanted to play a brief clip. This was an ABC radio interview with Janet Lay, who's one of the locals who has been very active on this campaign and initiated a petition to keep the bank. So she did an excellent job in this radio interview, of which we'll play a clip.
We had the research director from the Australian Citizens Party fly over from Melbourne for our meeting. He was the only one to attend all 13 hearings of the Senate inquiry into banking closures. So he's got a lot of experience, which he has supported the community and has provided to recommendations to the council as to how to move forward. So his advice to the community was extremely helpful, and he does believe that we do have a fighting chance to change the outcome. He has seen other banks change their decisions and stay open in small communities.
Janet, what's the significance? If the Bendigo Bank closes, what would it mean for Queenstown?
It's a coffin nail. It's the Bendigo Bank saying that Queenstown, the West Coast, because it's not just the last bank in Queenstown, it's the last bank on the entire west coast of Tasmania. They expect us just to be able to pop to Burnie to do our banking. Bendigo Bank in Burnie is only open 3 days a week and could very well be the next on the chopping block. It's an economic coffin nail as such. Without a bank, what sort of business is going to come and invest in the West Coast?
Janet?
We've had a new business owner buy a business in Queenstown, opened his bank accounts with the Bendigo Bank one day. The next day, the announcement came out for the closure.
And a difficult way to reset, particularly if you need to get a float at the start of each trading day.
Yeah, absolutely. When you're relying on the bank at post service to carry enough change for a business to operate, multiple businesses around the West Coast to operate, the bank at post is only legally able to hold so much money. Armaguard currently travels down once a fortnight to collect money from the West Coast and replenish funds. A small business, if you operate a small business 5 days a week and you work in that business 5 days a week, you can't take a day off, shut the doors for your business and go up the coast to do your banking.
All right, now, also to mention, this is moving quite fast. The Member of Parliament for Monash, Mary Aldred, new MP.
It's in Victoria.
Yes, that's in Victoria. She actually replied because, of course, our supporters, and many of you, no doubt, have been writing to their MPs demanding that they force onto the table in Parliament a discussion of the findings of that bank closure inquiry and the fact that the government hasn't responded. So she replied to an email message from one of our ACP activists and said she was deeply concerned about the recent announcement by Bendigo Bank, including in the Corumburra branch, which is in her electorate, and said she would write to the CEO, which she did, and she subsequently met with Bendigo Bank executives. So she moved on it pretty fast, and she said she would raise it in Parliament, which she did. We'll roll that clip.
I give the call to the honourable member for Monash.
Speaker, I rise today to speak on the importance of banking facilities in regional communities. Bricks and mortar banking in our regions is critical for small businesses, for older Australians, for people with a disability and anyone who simply can't travel to the next town down the road. The Bendigo Bank recently announced it would close its Corumburra branch in South Gippsland. This is a terrible outcome for our community and one that demands the opportunity for broader national focus. In 2023, the Senate undertook an inquiry into bank closures in regional Australia. The committee reported in May 2024, after a serious consultation period that ran for 15 months, had 13 public meetings across Australia and received over 600 submissions. I make special mention of the Corumburra Roundtable's fine advocacy on behalf of our community in its submission. There were 8 specific recommendations aimed at addressing what was described as a growing humanitarian crisis in both regional areas and capital city suburbs. It is over a year since the inquiry's report was handed down. And according to the Finance Sector Union, in that time we've seen branches close at a rate of 2 to 3 per week. Despite the fact the Albanese Labor government was required to respond within 90 days of the tabling of the report, the recommendations remain unresolved a full year later. On behalf of residents in South Gippsland who are about to have their last remaining bank branch close, I call on the Albanese government to get its act together and respond to this report. Yeah.
All right, so it's very good when an MP is true to their word, and you know, you only get that traction though if you guys continue to ring them, write to them. So please do that if you haven't done it already.
Yeah, and this again comes at what Mr. Aldred there mentioned is this comes back to this closed for business. All the real businesses that make this country work are shutting down, and Gippsland, that area happens to be the hub for the gas from the Bass Strait that is mostly getting sucked up the pipelines up to Queensland and exported, and there's no gas reservation and the government pretends to want one and then doesn't do it. Mm-hmm. One of the other regions, which we've mentioned before in the course of this bank closures inquiry, but where most of the mining happens, in the Ashburton region in Western Australia. Well, those mining companies, BHP and so on, they minimise their taxes. Some years they only pay in the hundreds of dollars in tax. Did you know that? It's unbelievable. Multi-billion-dollar companies shipping millions of tonnes of iron ore, of coal out of this country. Ashburton, the Pilbara, everybody's heard of the Pilbara, has no banks.
Yeah,
none.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
And you know, all these and these mining companies are employing mostly fly in, fly out workers from somewhere else, not locals. There's no obligation anymore for them to invest in and support local towns like there used to be in the old days. You know, there's all these mining towns that had secondary industries built up, and now they're dying. Yes. Because the mine isn't obliged to. It's not part of their either legal or what they call social license to do that anymore. So, you know, they pay a pittance in royalty, little to no taxes, rip the guts out of the country, and again retire with their bonuses and their whatever it is, and we're all left holding the bag. Yeah, I mean, all the pro-business, even the neoliberal politicians should be ashamed of this. We are not open for business, we are open for plunder, as we said in the headline, and this just goes to show. Please do participate in that campaign, but we want to take a quick moment now to discuss another campaign we need your engagement with, which is on the cash distribution consultation, which is being conducted by the Council of Financial Regulators, that's its name. So this concerns the big beat up about how expensive it is to transport cash apparently, and of course we had bank CEOs crying about this, even though it's their cost of doing business. They don't want to have to do anything that they don't make a big enough profit out of. Well, ideally they'd like to palm off all their costs onto somebody else and make pure profits. That's their model. Yeah, no, exactly. So that's what they do. They do that with the post offices, and now they want to do it with, you know, cash distribution. So basically the consultation paper in this inquiry has a certain number of assumptions, including the fact that it's only the private sector that could run cash distribution. So they're talking about, you know, give us your ideas about how that could be modelled, and they say we need to have a completely new regulatory framework to, you know, even though we really don't regulate anything in this country, but supposedly if we're going to set up a new system of doing it, which is privately run, we have to have a regulatory framework, and that's going to be expensive, and et cetera, et cetera. So what we've proposed, and you can read more about this in the Australian Alert Service this week, is that no, we happen to have an agency, a government-owned agency that does distribution in this country, and that's Australia Post. Transporting wads of paper is literally its bread and butter business. Yes. If they happen to have $20 and somebody's well, it's plastic now, but you get my point. Yeah, no, exactly. And they've done it before. They did it for decades. That's right. So Australia Post should do it. It can do it. It's done it before. And, you know, this is something where the private sector actually won't do it. And I'll give you an example of that.
One of our good supporters of the whole cause and a bank warrior, Michael Sanderson, was at the Macquarie Bank AGM in the last week too, and he happened to raise this issue with Philip Lowe, who's the former RBA... Glenn Stevens, I should say.
The former governor of the RBA.
They all blur into sameness at a certain point. But yeah, so he's now the CEO of Macquarie Bank.
Sorry, chairman.
The chairman of Macquarie Bank, get it right. Sanderson put this question to him, and you'll see the response.
Macquarie has a strong track record investing in essential infrastructure monopolies like airports and utilities. With over 590 Australian towns without a bank, would the board consider creating a Macquarie-led regional branch network and socialising a licensed monopoly in banking? And would the bank explore acquiring Armgard and Prosegur to build a national cash distribution monopoly? Such moves would strengthen Macquarie's social licence, meet public purpose obligations and deliver long-term returns through critical infrastructure that serves both the shareholders and community.
I'm struggling with the notion of a Macquarie-led banking monopoly, to be honest, but I think branch banking in the regions is not something that's in our business plan or our strategy. We've never had branches. We are a digital bank, so I don't think we are really the ones to supply some kind of regional thing. I think it'd be better actually to base such a thing on the regional infrastructure that's already there with the long-established banks, and if it was in the national interest and adequate for shareholders to take part in that, I'm sure we'd consider it, but I don't think that's been put to us at this point.
Okay, well, in lieu of that, would you actively support a public post office-based bank?
That's not a question I've given enough thought to, I'm sorry, so I can't answer that. It's not obvious that we would, but...
Perhaps you would. There's a lot of communities out there have been debanked, and and you do have access to SIMO.
Not through any action of ours, though.
No, granted. As I said, I just thought, the opportunity of another monopoly, 590 of them would be attractive.
Thank you for the suggestion.
Now, Robert Barwick's comment on X in response to that, he said, MacBank isn't interested in monopolies that serve communities, only those that gouge communities to profit shareholders, which is a case in point. And, furthermore, what we're seeing across the board is that private banks, this is just the default, private banks are given control over everything from banking services to cash access, and Australians have no right or recourse, particularly those that are debanked or so forth, or just don't have access to services because they don't exist, or forced to go digital because they have no choice. The banks are exerting a concentration of power over the Australian economy and who can participate in the Australian economy, and that'll get worse if cash distribution and availability is not protected. And I'll also mention that the whole surcharge fiasco is another result of the drive to go cashless. So that can all be rectified with the Australia Post Bank solution that we're promoting. Now, speaking about Australia Post, Robert Barwick and I had the privilege last Saturday night of being guests at a dinner of the licensed post office group who had their annual general meeting and other activities in Melbourne. Look, the licensed post office group have the greatest interests in having a thriving postal bank network. As you said earlier, there's an effort to shut down the number of post offices, and that is happening. And of course, Australia Post licensees, they've put their own money into running these operations. They've been doing more and more of the work that the banks should be doing and not getting adequately compensated for it. Christine Holgate, when she was the CEO at Australia Post, actually fought for and achieved better compensation for bank at post services, and we saw what happened to her. And Robbie was able to, when he addressed the dinner meeting, speak to the fact that we were able to run our campaign to try to restore Christine Holgate to her job, which we ultimately didn't succeed with.
Cleared her of all the allegations against her and the character assassinations she was subjected to by Albanese and Morrison and the rest, but they still wouldn't give her a job back because that was always the key point of the whole operation.
But nonetheless, we were able to bring to the fore and to the table nationally and get a great recognition within a lot of parliamentary layers of the importance of what Australia Post does and that they need to be compensated for it, and that led into the drive for the postal bank. And of course, none of that campaign would have been possible without the licensed post office group and their leadership. And what a bunch of amazing people. These are people that work with local communities all day, every day, and they recognise, at least the people that I had the pleasure to talk to over the course of the night, exactly everything that we've just laid out in this show. I mean, not to mention a multitude of other things, like the fact that they're doing remittances, where the other banks have just, again, vacated the field. They're doing everything for people, helping them avoid scams. You know, people come to them all the time because they don't have a bank branch to say, oh, I got this email, you know, should I click on this link, etc. So, you know, they're already doing the job, and we need to go the next step and actually turn them officially into the public banking counter of the nation.
Yeah, because the big banks, it's not that they can't do these jobs for the big banks' customers. The banks won't authorise them to do it because they write the terms of their deal. Imagine being able to write your own contract.
Yeah.
Right?
Even the charges that Bank at Post charges are not their charges.
No, it goes back to...
We'll put a sign up that was spotted in Queensland on the screen, because it's the banks that are making you pay for that.
The banks levy the charge and then pay a few cents back to the LPOs, to Australia Post. It doesn't cover the cost of the work that these people are having to do.
Yeah. So let me just run a very short clip of Robbie speaking to the Licensed Post Office Group dinner.
I'll tell this to everybody. The last time I think we met Christine was a couple of years ago. We were in Canberra together, and Christine's sitting down with us and she's talking a mile a minute about what she's doing at Team Global Express. And she's such a genius. And it just cuts me that this woman, who is a true business genius, was prepared to work in public service in Australia running our post office. And those pygmies, those mental pygmies in Parliament, those people who have no concern for the national interest whatsoever, it's all about playing political games to them. Those people stabbed her in the back and threw her under a bus. And the only people who defended Christine Holgate to the degree she deserved was the Licensed Post Office Group. And so we played a role, but we only played a role because you guys were the ballast in this story. You guys were the people who knew the truth and were prepared to state it unequivocally. And since then, I've got to really appreciate the role of licensed post officers in Australia. You are the most important stakeholders in Australia Post. You are the only ones who've invested your own money in this business. And it is a crime what Australia Post is doing to you. I hope it hasn't been lost on anybody that the man who is single-handedly responsible for Christine Holgate not getting her job back, Simon Birmingham, he was the finance minister who appointed the Maddox lawyers' inquiry into the watches, which cleared her name. The Senate inquiry cleared her politically. The Maddox lawyers' inquiry cleared her actions over the watches. He should have given her a job back. Instead, he appointed Paul Graham into his current position. And he has just taken up the job as the new CEO of the Australian Banking Association. And that's why, ladies and gentlemen, our party, the Citizens Party, is not going to rest until we get a public postal bank. Because the power of the banks in this country must be broken. Thank you. Thanks for listening.
All right, so now just to remind you before we get to our next topic, details are below. If you can make just a very straightforward comment to this consultation, next Friday is the deadline, so do it when you get off this watching this video. And we simply want people to say something like, to save cash, the government should immediately establish an Australia Post Bank which should be responsible for cash distribution all over Australia. So something like that, keep it simple, and you'll see the email to send it to on the screen and below. All right, next topic briefly. Seize the moment to end war. Now, people will have seen, as we'll put up on the screen ourselves, the incredible rally that took place on the Sydney Harbour Bridge on the weekend. It was very relevant that this was not going to go ahead, and then the court intervened, and in the judgment, Justice Belinda Riggs said that the march at this location is motivated by the belief that the horror and urgency of the situation in Gaza demands an urgent and extraordinary response from the people of the world. The evidence indicates there is significant support for the march. So that was an important intervention.
Yeah, as one of the participants, a retired diplomat and anti-war and organiser Alison Brunowski put it, said, well, the march was going to go ahead because we knew the police couldn't arrest 90,000 of us. But, you know, good on the judge for making it legal for, with this 11th hour ruling. Right? So.
Yeah, and you can see in the pictures there, as people will have seen on the television, Julian Assange was at that march, and he was standing beside numerous other people, and there were MPs and so forth. But two of the people that were there were at a rally and a meeting the previous day with, again, Robert Barwick. He's been around a bit this week. So that was Antoinette Lattouf, of course, who lost her job for...
won a wrongful dismissal suit against the ABC for firing her for doing her job as a journalist, in, you know, peripherally, at least on social media, just reposting a Human Rights Watch report that outlined the reasons for the charges of genocide against Israel for what they're doing to Gaza.
And she was at a rally with... to defend Mary Kostakidis, the former SBS presenter, the previous day that Robbie also spoke at. And of course, Mary's also involved in a court case under the Racial Discrimination Act simply for doing journalism also.
Yeah, Mary Kostakidis is now an independent journalist, and all she did was what any good journalist would do. She reposted an excerpt of a speech by the now deceased leader of the Lebanese political movement Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, about again their response to what Israel's doing to Gaza, and that because he cited in there about this phrase from the river to the sea, right? Hezbollah's argument being, no, it's all Palestine, they don't recognise Israel. And the comment was, well, Israel says the same thing, but they say it's all our land, there's no Palestine. And apparently that's anti-Semitic, even though it's just a restatement of Israeli government's stated policy. So that was what she was sued over. Supposedly that was, racial discrimination, just by, doing her job as a journalist.
Yeah. So the meeting on Saturday in Sydney was called Stand with Mary. And I want to play just a couple of clips here. The first is what Robert Barwick had to say to the event, which you can see at the end. You know, the crowd was very appreciative, and you can also see in another brief clip some of the reactions as Robbie left the meeting because he had to hop on a plane to come back to Melbourne to address the Licensed Post Office Group event in a bit of a hurry, with delayed flight and all. So have a look at this.
I've got to duck out to the airport. I've got a speech to give in Melbourne tonight. And then at 6 o'clock in the morning, I'm going down to Hobart to then drive 4 hours to Queenstown to give a speech there to help them save their bank. Because the Citizens Party is across a bunch of different issues. But this issue, is the most important issue in Australia today by far. Because we are the first generation to witness a live stream genocide. And we will not stop that. without the truth and without the freedom of speech to speak the truth, which Mary is fighting for. I love Mary because I think before this genocide in Gaza, the defining war crime of this 21st century, and certainly the defining political event in my lifetime, was the Iraq War. And the Iraq War proved how important truth was. And Mary has used her status as an icon of the Australian media, and I believe that's why she's being targeted, because she is an icon of the Australian media. Back before all this, million channels and streaming and whatever, who did you tune into for your international news to know what was going on? Mary Kostakidis. And she courageously used her status to stand up for the principle of free speech and justice and against war in other cases. Notably Julian Assange. I remember the day I realised it was Mary Kostakidis that was leading the advocacy for Julian Assange, because until then, I don't think I'd ever seen someone in the mainstream media I would have considered honest. I've met a lot more people now. There's a few more, but she used her position to lead the advocacy for Julian Assange. She's also used her position on a far less popular case, which is the case of Dan Duggan, which is a case that our party has advocated for. An innocent Australian citizen is coming up to 3 years in prison without breaking any Australian laws. And this is a symbol of our subservience to a foreign power, this case. And nobody wants to talk about it except people like Mary Kostakidis. So you all remember, the famous saying by the German Lutheran minister Martin Niemöller. First they came for the communists and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a communist. Mary Kostakidis doesn't ever have to say that, because she has always spoken up for these people in these other cases. And now she's the target of these forces that want to gaslight us into accepting the worst thing humanity has ever witnessed. And I mean that in the broadest sense. Nobody has ever witnessed this that we've witnessed before. Well, the whole world at once is witnessing a live stream genocide. And we are being told that is Israel's right to defend itself. And we are being told by our government, that somehow the government of Israel, which is also the most extreme government ever in Israel, is somehow some kind of a legitimate entity defending its people while it's slaughtering so many children and innocent people in Gaza. And those are the people that are targeting Mary Kostakidis. So Mary has stood for everybody else, all these other important causes. Mary, Australia owes you a debt for what you've done. All Australians are behind you in your fight for free speech and against the genocide. Thank you, and thanks for inviting me.
Oh, there you are.
Thank you so much. Thank you for coming, mate.
I love your podcasts.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Good on you.
All right, so, and as you can see, one of the big issues at that event was the Gaza situation, and there's also been a lot of voices here and overseas, too many to recount right now, naming and calling out the genocide. It's come to that point where very few can continue to deny it. There was, among other things, an open letter that's just been put to Anthony Albanese, Prime Minister, from Pearls and Irritations, which includes the names of ex-ambassadors and diplomats, including our friend John Lander, a former ambassador, who are saying essentially that, Albanese's made some noises, but his action on Gaza is far too slow, and demanding recognition of the Palestinian state, and even more interestingly, Israeli demilitarisation of Gaza and the West Bank, ending Australian exports of weapons and weapons components to Israel, and urging the Albanese government to tell the United States, our wonderful ally, to do the same. So actually taking some serious action here is what that group of a dozen or so people were demanding. Now, this is becoming more urgent by the moment, and there's new footage showing exactly what Gaza looks like, which is horrifying. And this particular vision that I've found here is a comparison, so you can see. I mean, to me, the most striking thing is in the previous images that you're seeing on the screen now. You see colour. You know, you see darker colours of buildings, green, landscape, and structures, roads, and then the comparative coverage, it's just grey oblivion. Just
yeah, everything's rubble, been reduced to rubble and covered in concrete dust, and that's why that looks like.
And just to say, because people will have also seen in the media this week with the 80th anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, some of the images associated with that, which are strikingly similar. But as you know, various reports have pointed out, those weapons that were used in today's terms would be considered low-yield weapons of 15 kilotons or so.
Yeah,
compared
those are the
to
kind of what they call tactical nukes.
That's right.
Israel has some hundreds apparently of undisclosed warheads of that type that it uses to threaten the
and which
region.
we've been very close to having had deployed a number of times in recent years, and still remain very close to that if we don't take the actions to restore diplomacy and end war, and have politicians with the courage to actually do what that statement that I referenced before demands, which is to cut off the supplies of weapons and other things to countries like Israel that are conducting these actions.
Yeah. And you can tell that they're feeling the heat, because even in today's or yesterday's newspapers, it's reported that even the Liberal Party now, the biggest, the Southern Hemisphere's biggest Israel boosters, Andrew Hastie, has the ex-Special Forces captain, now MP from WA, he's coming out, at least some level of concern, because as he says, he's saying, well, they're right to, go after Hamas, and they're right to bombard the hell out of Gaza. But it's getting a bit beyond it now, guys. What's your end game? We need to know what your end game is. It's the old thing, what does victory look like? Well, again, I don't know if he's just playing dumb or if he's actually that dumb. Mm-hmm. But you can look at Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel. Benjamin Netanyahu has said it. Donald Trump, the President of the United States, who supplies weapons and political cover to Netanyahu and to Israel.
Yep.
Ministers of the Israeli government in completely rabid, unhinged statements that have been quoted by Israeli media. Their end game is the complete eradication or expulsion of the entire population of Gaza, and to seize the land for themselves, because that is, and has always been Israel's plan for Gaza and for every other bit of historic Palestine.
Yep.
So if you want to know what the end game is,
that's what
they've already told you.
Yeah, and we'll put a link below, because I wrote about this in the Alert Service a couple of weeks ago, in that the plan that Trump elaborated, which was devised in Israel, and we went through the backdrop of where that came from, to turn the Gaza Strip into the new Riviera of the Middle East, absolutely disgusting. And that involved the outfit, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, coming in to, basically enforce ethnic cleansing in the region, drive people out, because if you're starved, you're going to have to leave. And that the shut-off of food supplies that Israel did between March and May, which is the reason now they're saying, we've got plenty of aid going in now. Well, sorry, for almost 3 months, people had nothing, and you don't come back from starvation. When you're at the point where your organs and your body's breaking down, there's no coming back from it by sending a bit of food in. That's what you wanted, and that's what you got.
Well, and what they're letting in now is not even close to adequate.
No.
Even had the population not been starved for all those months.
Yes.
There's not enough aid being let in. It's
not being distributed
it's not
adequately,
being distributed because they're not allowing
in enough locations. And again, you can read those details, and there's other things online you can read where they show, the calorie allocation for the people is not enough. This is a genocide, so no two ways about that. Now, on another intervention, the Victorian ALP conference took place on the weekend as well, and they passed not only a motion to recognise Palestine, but I wanted to come back to AUKUS because, and we'll put the headline up, they supported overwhelmingly a motion to call on all branches and the party to demand an inquiry into AUKUS, and if and when such an inquiry takes place, that the Labor Party branches will demand that Australia withdraw from AUKUS, and they put out a media release to that effect, headlined "Victorian ALP rejects AUKUS," because again, this is the directionality of war if we stick with AUKUS, and we're going to bring war from where it is now to our part of the world if we pursue it. Do we want that same thing right in our country, in our backyard? No, we do not. So please call your Member of Parliament, write to your Member of Parliament to demand an inquiry into AUKUS, which is our final instruction for you. I know I've given you a lot of jobs to do.
Because, the Greens have put up a motion in the Senate for such an inquiry.
Yes.
And so the details are on our website.
Yes. So in the next, I believe next time Parliament sits, that'll be raised. So
that is the plan.
So as soon as you get a chance to do that, and again, keep it simple, just demand an inquiry into AUKUS to your federal, state MP in whichever way you prefer. So thanks for doing all that. It does yield results, as you've seen through the course of this show. We've just put them on display for you, and we'll bring many more, hopefully, victories in the weeks ahead. So thanks for tuning in. That's the show for this week. Thanks, Richard.
Thanks, Elisa.
And see you again next week.
Authorised by Robert Barwick, Citizens Party, Melbourne.